The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good evening, everyone. I hope that you can all hear me. Welcome to the uh, edition of Foundations for Elite Health for Wednesday of this week. We have a very important topic, which is sexual dysfunction, that we're going to discuss today. But we've got a lot of people joining, so I'm just going to leave it a minute or so just so that we can get as many people on as possible. I'd like to say thank you to everyone that is online listening, and also perhaps offline listening, because uh, we've put a lot of information into this call, and what we hope is that people will be able to use it going forward, to be able to share it, so that other people can listen to it maybe offline. They feel more comfortable listening to it. So we will package it up with the slides, and we'll make that available for people to be able to share. So I can see we've got quite a few people jumping on, so we're just going to leave it a minute before we start. But we will keep to time today, so this will be a half-an-hour webinar. If you've listened to some of the other fantastic Foundations for Elite Health webinars that we have done this week, and in fact back in May when we did the first series, you will know that normally we have a couple of people that jump on the line and give us a testimonial. But today we're going to change the format of the webinar slightly. We're going to have more information, and we aren't going to have anyone jumping on to give us a testimonial, which is kind of understandable given the topic. But hopefully the depth of information will give you some really good takeaways from the presentation today. So we're just going to give it another 30 seconds and then we're going to begin. I can see lots of people still jumping in line, which is great. For those people just jumping on now, thank you very much for coming. We will be starting this very shortly, and just to let you know, the session is being recorded, and it will be made available offline next week. So let's talk about sexual dysfunction. So on tonight's webinar, we're going to be looking at how many people this particular topic affects, some of the main causes for sexual dysfunction in both men and women. We'll look at the details of how male and female sexual response happens, and what physical conditions can hamper that, as well as some things that you can do to help it. And finally, we will look at some external options that are available for people that wish to address it through other means. So when we talk about sexual dysfunction, the reason I like this group of words that we have put up here on the first slide is that it is called by many, many different things. And that's one of the reasons why people don't realize just how large an issue this is because it may be tagged under either sexual dysfunction or performance or impotence or reduced libido. But ultimately what we're going to be talking about today are all of those areas. And so what I'd like to do is just to let you know that some of the slides are going to be male focused because we have some really interesting statistics on how it affects the male population, but we also have some really interesting slides and statistics for women as well, because this is a completely inclusive issue. And in fact, some of the statistics that I will show you shortly, I think may surprise you in terms of the inclusivity of the issue. Let's start first with men. In 2016, a UK company did some research on how big an issue sexual dysfunction was for men in the UK. So firstly, it affects 4.3 million men in the UK. Now, if you're having trouble thinking about how big is 4.3 million men, well, it's enough to fill every major British football stadium. So that is a lot of stadiums in this country. It is also more than the number of people that go to the gym every day. Yet only 33% of men ever seek any help or advice on the issue of sexual dysfunction. And I think the most damning statistic of all is it's 1 in 5 men. 1 in 5 men at some point in their life will experience some form of sexual dysfunction. So let's look at, in men's terms, erectile dysfunction. What are the main causes, both physical and psychological? The physical causes, some of them are fairly obvious. If you smoke, it is a known fact that your libido goes down. If you're on certain medication, if you drink too much, which causes physical problems, if you've had some kind of surgery. But the two I want to concentrate on really are the bottom two there, diabetes and heart disease, because they are the major contributory facts towards erectile dysfunction in men. And not only does there exist a link between diabetes, heart disease, and erectile dysfunction, but there is also a major link between having erectile dysfunction and then going on and having diabetes and heart disease. And we'll touch on that really important topic later. Around the psychological causes, stress is a big inhibitor, performance anxiety, depression, loss of interest and relationship problems. And another surprising one is reliance on erectile dysfunction treatments. Most people that choose to use medicinal treatments for erectile dysfunction build up a tolerance, and so need actually more and more of the chemicals for it to be able to continue working. And when you stop taking those chemicals, you sometimes actually, as a side effect, find erectile dysfunction happens even more. So there is a reliance on erectile dysfunction treatment and keeping that cycle going. Now, I mentioned the fact that there is a link between erectile dysfunction and diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So if we look at some statistics here, if we start on the left with cardiovascular disease, so cardiovascular disease is where fat accumulates in arteries, they start to narrow, and the blood flow around the body is inhibited to a degree. And of course, given the nature of what is required to maintain an erection, which is good blood flow, cardiovascular disease, you could see, would be a natural causal effect for erectile dysfunction. And in fact, 65 out of every 100 men with a history of cardiovascular disease have erectile dysfunction. And if you look at the issue of diabetes, it's pretty similar. 66% of men with type 2 diabetes have erectile dysfunction. And people with type 1 diabetes is almost 38%. So what we're actually saying is it's important to understand that there are physical conditions which can cause erectile dysfunction. But if you are suffering from erectile dysfunction, actually you may also want to consider screening yourself for that, because diabetes and cardiovascular disease could be something that you want to rule out going forward, which is a really important topic, which is one of the reasons why screening for men for erectile dysfunction is a good first step for people. So as I said, 70% of physical causes for erectile dysfunction are either directly related to, cardiovascular, to, 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 If we talk about female sexual dysfunction, or FSD as it is quite clinically known in the US, um, there are very similar physical causes. So again, diabetes and heart disease are very much the major causes physically, but there are also imbalances in hormone levels. The menopause, is also related to specifically in women, kidney disease and liver failure, as well as alcoholism, drug abuse, and medications, very similar to the male demographics. We also have similar psychological causes: stress, anxiety, sexual performance, marital problems, um, possible past sexual trauma, feelings of guilt, and again, same as the male statistics, really, depression, pretty much similar across the board. So FSD is categorized in four main areas. So one is the lack of libido, so the lack of sexual desire or interest. Uh, the second one is the inability to become aroused. The third one is the inability to achieve an orgasm, and the fourth one is pain during sex. So if you look at the treatments that are out there, they will look to fit into one of those four specific areas. The other thing to notice, and I talked about statistics earlier, is in the US, 43% of women said that they had experienced some symptoms of sexual dysfunction. And you compare that to the same survey that was done where men actually reported 32%. So it really is an issue that affects both men and women to a very large extent. And I talked earlier about the fact that it's about blood flow, which is why so many people with cardiovascular issues suffer from some form of sexual dysfunction. And really, if you think about the way that the blood flows around your body, normally your blood vessels are nice and wide, and lots of blood flows through. But then when fat starts building up, or you have external influences like high blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol, smoking, you start to slow that blood flow down. And as you then change your body and start to adapt to things like lower salt, lower cholesterol, better diet, more exercise, quit smoking, very much so, and medication and supplements, then that process begins to reverse itself and go back. And that's very similar to the way that erectile dysfunction happens, and I'll show you exactly how that happens very shortly. So we talked about the fact that erectile dysfunction could be a warning sign for cardiovascular issues, and the reason that it's really important is what you see here, and they are not to scale, they're not to size, but they are to scale between each other. If you look at the right hand side, you see the largest artery in the body, which is between 6 and 8 millimeters. And when it's blocked, the picture below, you see that it's actually still has the ability to function. It's not completely blocked, but it has a much thicker wall. And as the size of the artery reduces, the amount of available space for the blood gets significantly smaller. And the smallest artery in the body is the penile artery at between 1 and 2 millimeters. And when it gets clogged, it really does get clogged, which is why you have the inability to maintain an erection when you have a lot of cardiovascular issues, because your arteries are blocked and there just isn't enough space for the blood to get there to be able to do its job. Now, if we go back to the very start of how this whole process works, so the process works in your body with a thought that turns into an arousal electronic message, if you like, and it basically hinges on a chemical called CGMP. So when the brain gets aroused, it sends neurological signals to lots of parts of the body, but specifically to the penis. and the nerve cells in the penis start producing this miracle molecule called nitric oxide. So when nitric oxide is produced, it rushes around and sends lots of information between the cells in that particular part of the body, which creates cGMP, which is cyclic guanosine monophosphate. And that basically controls the hormones in that area. So with the blood flow and the hormones in sync, what happens is the blood vessels of the penis dilate, it increases the blood flow, and voila. Uh, so it actually starts with your brain sending electronic signals, but the key uh, uh, process that happens is actually about when you start producing the nitric oxide. So what happens is once that is done, blood flows in. So the important message here is the bottom one, which is to gain an erection, you need three things. You need a healthy blood supply to be able to pump the blood around your body. You need a healthy nervous system to be able to send the electric messages around your body and for them to react with each other. And you need the libido in the first place to be able to think about that message, which comes from your brain, which creates the nitric oxide, which then sets off the cGMP, and the rest hopefully is history. So that's how the process works. And it's actually very similar in women. So women have exactly the same trigger mechanism in the brain, and that sends the same messages down. And guess what? You release nitric oxide, and the nitric oxide causes the muscles to relax, the vessels to dilate, blood flow increases, and bingo, exactly the same process has happened. And the key again is nitric oxide. The trouble is, from a physiological point of view, lots of things can get in the way of that process. So for example, if we start at the very top, hormone imbalances can disturb the electrical functions and the messages that go into the nervous system, so that you never actually trigger the initial sexual desire. So you don't get to the point of getting the nitric oxide because you never get the electric signals that cause that in the first place. And that's also the same if you're taking certain medications, or if you are on drugs or alcohol, because the brain chemistry gets a bit foggy and the process stops. But assuming that process is working okay, you can still have other issues, because the electrics can be fine in the body, but through other things, for example, like diabetes, you can then have nerve damage, which stops the message from getting to the arteries to say, please release the nitric oxide. So the arteries could be fine and they could be ready to release the nitric oxide, but actually the nerves are damaged, which tell it to do that. And then lastly, things like high cholesterol, high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease damage the artery walls. And so the nitric oxide is released, but there isn't enough space to be able to fill the penis to make it stiff at the end of the process. So there's many physical things that can get in the way of that process. The great thing to know is that there are a number of things that you can do yourself to alleviate some of those physical issues. And the first one, surprisingly, is to maintain dental health. The second one I think is really key is weight loss, because with weight loss you also tend to reduce the risk of cardiovascular and diabetes issues. Limit the amount of alcohol. Definitely stop smoking. It's one of the biggest external contributory factors to erectile dysfunction. They never tell you that on the adverts, but statistically that is a fact. You can do pelvic floor exercises, and there are a number of natural remedies that you can also look at. So for example, the production of L-arginine, which stimulates nitric oxide. Pomegranates are very good for you. Raw cacao, garlic, and the classic Far Eastern recipe, red Korean ginseng. And we'll touch on some of those as we go through the rest of this webinar. There are, of course, very powerful drugs that you can use. You know, they're available now. We've got adverts on the television telling us that we can go to the chemist and buy some pills without needing a prescription anymore. And I just went online earlier and did some screenshots. So obviously Viagra is the most well known. Chemically, it's sildenafil. And interestingly, the women's alternative, Womanara, is also, if you notice, created using sildenafil. So actually, both of them effectively work in the same way, which kind of makes sense given what we learned about earlier about how the process works in pretty much the same way. The issue with sildenafil, it is a very powerful chemical drug, and there are a number of main side effects. And the side effects that you see on the screen here are the ones that have been reported by greater than 2% of people that have used sildenafil. So, for example, 28% have experienced headaches, which means that almost 30% of the time you take one of these pills in order to have sex, you gain one of the biggest reasons why people don't want to have sex, which is a headache, which is amazing. 9% nasal congestion, so it feels like you've got a cold. People have experienced rashes. In fact, one of, I guess, the most famous user of Viagra, Hugh Hefner, who died at the age of 91, went deaf because he had so much Viagra that one of the side effects for a small number of people is that you stop hearing. And he famously said, I would rather be deaf in one ear than never have sex again. And he said that when he was 87. So there are a number of chemical ways, but like most drugs, there are significant side effects. If we look at the current research that is done on FSD, on the medications, sildenafil is still at the top of the list for the ones that they are doing the most research on. But again, you look at the side effects there for women: headaches, flushing, rhinitis, which is the noise in the ears, visual disturbance. The second most popular one is Argin Max, which is based on L-arginine, which we'll touch on in a minute. No side effects, which is very interesting, but you need 6 capsules a day. And then it goes down to a number of other drugs. And if you look at some of the side effects, there are, you know, constipation, nausea, acne, hair growth, genital burning. None of those scream, I want to raise my libido, which is, you know, unfortunate. If you don't want strong drugs, there are lower level products available. Again, these two that I screenshotted earlier are from Amazon. So there's Mendurance and Power Act, very male advertising. And interestingly, they are both based on L-arginine, which was mentioned previously, and they have also added caffeine to be able to give you a little more energy. Now, that's great, but if you then go a bit deeper and you look at the research and the reviews that people are leaving on Amazon, and you know, I didn't cherry pick these were in a list. You know, those are not reviews that would make me want to go and buy one of those products. But if you look at the ingredients in both of those products, they are L-arginine and guarana, which is a caffeine. So very, very interesting. And the reason it's interesting is that there are a number of studies that have shown that the use of L-arginine is actually of benefit for people with erectile dysfunction. And if you look also here, it is another indicator would be L-citrulline. So a combination of L-arginine and L-citrulline would actually greatly affect erectile dysfunction. And the reason is that L-arginine and L-citrulline create nitric oxide, which is the naturally occurring molecule in your body that vasodilates all of the arteries, which increases circulation to, let's just say, all the parts, all the organs in the body. And in fact, a recent survey that was done concluded that oral administration of L-arginine in high doses seems to cause significant subjective improvement in sexual function in men. So we go back to what we talked about earlier. So Argin Max, which is a supplement that is very popular, available in the US. It's been on all the television channels. It's been in the newspapers. But the issue with some of these, I would call lower quality supplements, is that when you start reading the back of the box, you need to take 6 capsules a day to get 2,000 milligrams of L-arginine. So 2,000 milligrams of L-arginine is about 5 times more than were in the Mendurance packets that we previously showed, but are still a very low amount of L-arginine to be able to have an active ingredient, and that's taking 6 tablets every day. So the great news is that Synergy products have been firstly quality tested and clinically trialed, and if you look at the Pro-arginine product on the left, it comes with 5,000 milligrams of L-arginine in each sachet, which is over twice the amount in the other product. It also, interestingly, comes with 200 milligrams of L-citrulline, which combines with the L-arginine to make the nitric oxide even better. And it also has the pomegranate that we saw earlier from the diagram about foods that can help. And there is also, to have the guarana aspect to give you the energy boost, we have a very safe alternative to energy drinks. So it is, again, more L-arginine. It's 500 milligrams of guarana, which is a naturally good caffeine. It's not the anhydrous caffeine that you find in the energy drinks that you get in cans that are just about to be banned for sale to children in the UK. It's a very good, safe one. And those two combined create a very powerful cocktail. And in fact, the Pro-arginine in the current edition of the Physician's Desk Reference, which is the doctor's Bible in the US, lists it as the highest quality L-arginine supplement in the world. So what I would like to do just to round things off is really just to stress that if you want to have a happy heart, which is important for a lot of things, your overall health, but also the important blood flow that happens around the genital area, and you want happy blood that is flowing in that area, I would completely look at taking Pro-arginine and E9 from Synergy to have a more natural way, which is non-chemically enhanced, to help you. And if you want to find out more about these products, then please talk to the person that invited you onto this webinar, and I'm sure they'll be happy to send you an ebook that we have on the topics. So with that, I would like to thank you very much for coming on tonight. As I say, it will be recorded and will be available offline if people want to review some of the information in it, or to share it with people that you think would benefit from it. So once again, thank you very much for your time tonight.